You know what's really been grinding my gears lately? Snakes in Ireland. We gotta drive them bitches out, boy. There are too many fucking snakes in motherfucking Ireland or airplanes and Samuel L. Jackson. I don't know. I guess that completely exhausts my St. Patrick's Day lore. So let's just get to what's actually been bothering me, which is anarchists. And before you say, do you mean anarchists or libertarians, Noah? Because one's left wing and one's right wing, and there's a difference, you know. Don't. Just don't, please. I know what you're gonna say, and you really gotta stop acting like what you saw on a BreadTube video from 2015 is big news to everyone else. It ain't. And I don't really draw much of a line between the left anarchists and the right anarchists anyway. Like they all, seem so badly to want me to do. As if, who they are is their opinion of themselves and the fanciful ideas they come up with for utopias. No, they all come from the same source and they all share a fundamental philosophical premise. It's only their conclusions that are different. And which fantasy land they think would be perfect if only everyone would just listen to them and their favorite YouTube subculture guy or whatever. But honestly, the ones who think they're left wing are usually they're usually kind of they're a lot worse. At least with the rightists, you know where you stand. They may not actually be against actual communism in the real world if they learn what it is, but at least they'll straight up tell you that they're individualists and they don't like the word communism. The left ones, they're like, well, I mean, you guys know the type, right? They're all about smashing the state, dude, and abolishing hierarchy, whatever that means. But the moment you bring up communism as an actual historical phenomenon and not some weird nonsense they've made up in their heads where everybody, holds hands all day and sings campfire songs together or whatever they call real communism, they start screaming gibberish at the top of their lungs and frothing at the mouth like some kind of gibberish rabies dog. They'll rant about Stalin being worse than Hitler and how everyone who didn't agree with him was forced to grow like 10 mustaches, and then Stalin ate all their babies, and then he ate their babies' babies, and then they'll claim that every single communist project in history was a totalitarian nightmare and unironically quote CIA propaganda like it's something they put decades of research into when really they saw someone with a hammer and sickle in their social media profile type it like one time in the past, right? It's like they've never heard of historical context or critical thinking. They just kind of vomit up every anti-communist talking point from the Black Book of Communism, a book so discredited that the right libertarians don't even reference it anymore. And even its co-authors had to distance themselves from it. Then, communism sufficiently debunked, they act like they're the good, pure left that doesn't have any of that pesky real world imperfection to taint their good, pure soul. They make a fetish out of purity and demand purity for their fetishes. And that is straight up weird. They've created a kind of subculture out of acting anti-authoritarian. But how does that translate to actual political action? What does it mean in reality? In reality, they seem to side with the actual existing authority in this country every single time it matters. The academy tells them to, get in the streets, man. And so they do. And what changes? Nothing, right? So they spend a few years yelling at each other about who is microaggression who. And then, the Rockefeller and Open Society Foundation said that we scream trans rights at old people now. Okay, well, they're the authority. We don't call the authority. So let's repeat everything they say like it's, the holy gospel and praise holy Butler and Foucault and in they them's righteous name we pray. Amen. Sorry. We can't do upholding the patriarchy or assuming genders of the Lord. So a, they, them. Not amen, a, they, them. But you know what they're like for real? Like for real. Like a guy who shows up to a job site, right, on demo day with a sledgehammer, and he smashes up a whole bunch of cabinets and then walks away immediately afterwards, patting himself on the back for dismantling the system, man. But demo day is only about a quarter of what we got to do to finish the job, right? They basically just smashed all of our customers' cabinets to pieces and acted like it was awesome without even bothering to talk to the crew, right? And we're all just standing there like, what on earth is this dude doing? Who is he? How did he even get here? And why is he leaving? And also, we weren't doing this guy's cabinets. The whole project was in the living room, not the kitchen, right? Right? We had the paperwork literally sitting on the counter with pictures of the built-ins that we needed to take out, which the anarchist would have known if he'd recognized the very obvious fact that nothing gets done without some kind of discipline and organization. And when we scale this whole thing up, well, you can't dismantle capitalism without those things, can you? And you certainly can't do it without a plan or through building something new at the same time. But no, they want to LARP as revolutionaries while sabotaging any actual movement to do that. And then, there's this whole pesky thing of the historical track record, which is nothing short of a complete and utter fucking disaster. So, for example, the time an anarchist literally shot Lenin in 1918. Yup, you heard right. You're not having an aneurysm. Fanny Kaplan, who was a member of the SRs and an anarchist, tried to assassinate Lenin because she thought he was too authoritarian. Never mind that, Lenin was leading a revolution that would change the entire world for good, right? No, let's just shoot the guy because he's not pure according to the fantasy land that you made up, right? And insist will exist if only everybody would just agree that you're smarter than we are and know everything and do everything you want us to. And we're all just getting started here. Strap in, son. But what's up, Sebastian?
Well, I just wanted to add on to the point about historical context, because that's, a great one, because really what they're all about is moral purity and, just being against authoritarianism just as a blanket. And when it comes down to it, nothing ever lives up to the ideal in their head. And, all censorship is inherently oppressive. Like, they can't understand that in certain contexts, certain things simply have to happen. Like, what would have happened if, Stalin and the USSR didn't ruthlessly go after fascist infiltration during World War II? They would have lost,
Right? And we'd all be speaking fucking German. And German, I'm sorry, Germans, it sounds dumb. I don't want to sound dumb. I like English. Anyway,
yeah, that's all I had to say. Yeah.
Thank you. But okay, so on the historical record, during the Russian Civil War in 1921, right? A group of sailors at the Kronstadt Naval Base, many of whom were anarchists or, influenced by anarchist ideas or whatever, they rebelled against the Bolshevik government. The communists were sending people there, right, to try to get things under control during a dangerous time. And they just straight up chose this time to rebel. Now, on the surface, this might sound like they're, taking a principled stand against evil authoritarianism, but the context tells a different story. The rebellion happens at a time when the Soviet Union was fighting for its very survival against the White Army, the Tsarist forces, and foreign intervention and internal counter-revolutionaries, right? The anarchists at Kronstadt weren't just, criticizing the Bolsheviks. They were actively undermining the revolution at a vulnerable moment. And who did they end up aligning with? Literal Tsarist nobility and reactionaries from Germany, from Prussia, from France, who wanted to restore the old order, right? And we can briefly touch on Nestor Makhno and his so-called Revolutionary Insurgent Army of Ukraine, which is going on at the same time, right? Makhno gets romanticized by anarchists as some great libertarian hero, but his movement was a complete fucking mess. Yes, he fought against the whites sometimes during the Russian Civil War, right? When he wasn't accidentally doing them a bunch of favors and sabotaging essential Red Army supply lines, that is. But he also spent a lot of time looting and terrorizing the Ukrainian countryside. His forces were committing pogroms against Jews, and they were notorious for their lack of discipline and their hostility to any kind of centralized authority, even when that authority was the working class. His anarchism was, less about actual liberation in the real world and more about purity fetishization, right? And moral posturing.
Yeah, it's like the peak of individualism to do this in an objectively revolutionary period.
Mm-hmm. 100%. There's countless stories of Machno riding into some remote village and burning everybody's money, then telling them they were liberating them, which is stupid. We're going to save the insanity of the CNT FAI in Spain for later tonight. Trust me, though, it's going to be worth it. So let's fast forward to today, right? These anarchists who somehow have the goal to call themselves Antifa or anti-fascist, while they're objectively on the side of fascists, whether that's encroaching financial elites during escalating crises here or siding with Azov battalion and neo-Nazi forces in Ukraine right now. And they still wonder why communists don't trust them. I mean, are they for real? They're literally just painting hammers and sickles on the rhetoric and political agenda of the ruling class. And they betrayed and fought against us all through history. Why would we trust them without them having to prove anything? Are they crazy? I don't get it. And I'm not the first communist to complain about this. Seriously. Like, people are always like, Noah, why are you so hard on anarchists? I'll tell you why. Fuck you. Stalin himself was doing it way back in 1907. That's when he wrote a few essays, right? And they put them together and called it Anarchism or Socialism. And it perfectly encapsulates why anarchism, both as ideology and doctrine, is fundamentally incapable of addressing the material realities of class struggle and revolutionary change and everything else. He breaks down the flaws of what really amounts to a petty bourgeois theory. And he points out that beyond the mistakes inherent in individualism, which are obviously there, it's dogmatic obsessions with abolishing all forms of authority and rejecting some abstract idea that they label the state that exists only in minds and not in reality with, context and class character, fails to understand the necessity of change within society itself. Anarchists want to magically leap from capitalism to a stateless, classless society overnight without anything else happening, right? As if they're static states of being and not processes in development. It's like trying to build a house, right? But skipping building the foundation and just, hoping the walls will somehow float in midair. Guess what? They fucking won't. Right? Stalin basically argues that the state has a class character at all times, which is just historical literacy, really. It's the state of a particular form of ruling class, and thus a proletarian state, even as it becomes large and powerful in order to protect the interests of the proletariat, is at the same time withering. Anarchists, on the other hand, reject this outright because they only see the surface level of anything, and they don't ever look for a deeper process that could be going on. They also see, any form of state power is inherently evil and oppressive to the individual, man. Like, don't tell me when to go to bed, Dad, which leaves them with no coherent strategy for actually defeating the status quo or preventing counter-revolution or anything. It's all well and good to talk about smashing the state, but what happens after that? They don't have an answer because their ideology is fundamentally subjectivist and idealist, not materialist. They're more concerned with moral posturing than with the hard, tedious work of actually building up organization and a whole new society. And what's more damning, even than that, is how their sort of rejection of organized struggle and like a fetishization of spontaneity and destruction, right? This has historically paved the way for fascism. It doesn't just align with the ruling class today, right? It's always historically done this through its desire to compare what happens in the real world to its fantasy land. Fascism itself rose out of the ashes of anarchist and reactionary movements that destabilize societies without offering any coherent alternative. And what happens when the liberal order is negated and we don't move forward with revolution? We get the outright dictatorship of the most reactionary elements of the current ruling class and its capital. Hitler was, in many ways, the most successful anarchist in history. He smashed the Weimar state, right? He destroyed all the movements and unleashed chaos and war. And during the Spanish Civil War, anarchists spent more time fighting communists than actually opposing Franco. Guess what that did? It aided the fascist cause, obviously. Anarchism's inability to provide a real alternative to capitalism creates a sort of vacuum, right? That fascism just fills because it's already there. And yet anarchists still don't seem to get it. And this is, without addressing the doctrinal roots of fascism, which are in anarchism through the Italians and syndicalism and Sorel. But that's a whole nother bag of bananas. We just ain't got time for it. Anyway, this is exactly what we see with modern anarchists in the USA. They'll rail against authority and hierarchy, but when it comes to actually organizing a movement that can challenge the bourgeois state, the elites, the establishment, whatever you want to call it, they're completely fucking lost. They'll sabotage every organizational project imaginable, whether knowingly or unknowingly, spread anti-communist propaganda, and align themselves with liberals, reactionaries, whatever, all in the name of opposing this authority while setting up rigid social authorities within their little groups based on, cancel culture, or who's the most PC, or whatever. It's like they learn nothing from history, or worse, maybe like they've learned all the wrong lessons from all the wrong people. CIA. Sorry. The point is, anarchists have a long history of undermining revolutionary movements in the name of ideological purity. That's the purity fetish. And if you haven't read the book on it, read the book on it. Jesus, where have you been the last 2 years? Living in some anarchist commune and yelling at someone for clapping too loudly or saying someone smelled bad because apparently that's now oppression, according to that wacky lady who wrote a whole fucking thesis on it. Get with the program. I edited that book, and it's one of the most important of our era so far. Anyway, anarchists, they're so obsessed with opposing any kind of authority that they end up playing into the hands of the very forces they claim to be fighting against. Left or right, same deal, don't matter, same results. They'll rail against commies and tankies and authoritarians and statists or whatever the fuck else. But when it comes to actually building something that can challenge the elites they claim to hate, they're nowhere to be found. Instead, they're busy spreading anti-communist propaganda, right? Sabotaging organizing efforts and generally being a thorn in the side of any of us trying to make real change. Let's be clear, this is not about ideological differences. It's about material goddamn reality. Capitalism is destroying our country, leading us towards World War III and continuing a fucking genocide right now. Things aren't getting bad. They're bad. They're already fucking bad. They're getting worse. We don't have time for this petty nonsense and ideological posturing. If anarchists really cared about liberation and freedom and whatever they say they do, right? They'd be working with us to build a movement that can actually challenge the system, solving problems pragmatically based on deciding what can actually work rather than sticking to some abstract dogma. But instead, they're too busy cosplaying as smarter than everyone else while being dumb enough to get manipulated by the most obvious narrative manipulation ever. So, to all the anarchists out there who can't stop regurgitating propaganda against communism, do us all a favor. Just take a look in the mirror, just for a minute. Ask yourself whose side you're actually on, rather than whose side you think you're on. Because right now, it sure as hell don't look like you're on the side of regular people. You look like the elites. You talk like the elite. You walk like the elite. So how the fuck are you not just a toady of the elites?
High Sheriff Hazard is a hard man to be. High Sheriff is his only plan. He digs through pockets, takes what he can, for he's High Sheriff Hazard. He caught me one evening, and here's what he said: "You look like a Russian, you look like a red, and if you're fond of your skin and your head, beware the High Sheriff of Hazard."
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Noah's show. And before we get started today, I want to confirm the rumors. For anyone who was wondering, yes, I do own that guy Pamphlets on X. I've been asked that a lot recently. It was, it was it wasn't a hard decision. I just own him. He's mine. He'll have to deal with that fact, What's up, Sebastian?
Oh, I just wanted to add on briefly to your point about
owning pamphlets.
Yeah. But I just think that the point about their lack of alternative is really pertinent, because it's like, if according to you, no socialist project has ever lived up to the ideals in your head, where the hell are you leading us?
Right.
And it's a failure of seeing things in their context and the process of development. It's like, if we take China, for example, it's like every single leader is separate. You see the wild 90s and the increase in capital and the increase in the amount of billionaires, and then you contrast that with today, when that number is going down, and they can't quite understand that it's the same thing. It's part of a continuation of a larger process. But to them, it's like, what's going on? What's the policy that's being enacted? And it's not a policy in particular. It's communism.
It's always, and I told a few weeks ago, I tried to have a debate with the guy who ruined Lost, right? Like the guy who played, I think he played the cat in Homeward Bound. He started some stupid, I don't know, party or whatever, the American Capitalist Party, and he wanted to debate me really bad. So I said, okay. And then he wanted to do this like big group debate, and I was like, you know what? I'll just debate you and your buddy. It's fine, right? And the whole time, I'm just like, look, you guys have this whole like ethical code that you think is how society changes. I don't buy it. right? I don't think society changes through you figuring out some logically coherent code of ethics you think can apply to the world if only everybody would follow it, right? Where has this society existed? Just give me your capitalist society and why is it somehow better than, eliminating more poverty than any other force in all of human history, which is an accomplishment communism has, right?
Yeah.
But they can't do it. They're like, well, just because it's never existed before.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, people have never, had gills and swam underwater and breathed with fishes either, right? But I'm not out here saying, well, if only we all got gills, everything would be better. Like there has to be some
Yeah,
reality
exactly.
in that.
Yeah, they want to go back to a time in which there's no historical basis to it. And in addition, they also think you can rewind history
Mm.
as if it's not some sort of progressive thing. And I'm sorry, we're not going to go back to the period of time in 1840s when there was, more free competition. It's
More
never
free.
going to happen again.
Well, didn't humans own other humans here at the time?
Yeah,
By the
exactly.
way, like this is some like utopic society. No, and the robber barons were already doing so many shady things. Like the amount of time we could just pick like almost any one Native American tribe at random, and the amount of times that they got moved around and killed and oppressed and punished in some way just because they found oil or coal or something else that some rising industrialist wanted on the land that our government put them on. It blows the entire thing into a sort of fantasy land because that's what was actually happening. It wasn't just capitalists coming up with great ideas and competing with each other. No, they were ruthless. They were killing people. They were cheating, lying, robbing, and stealing. They called them the goddamn robber barons. And I'm swearing a lot tonight. I don't know
Yeah.
why. I
If
apologize.
if it were true competition, free competition, then the natives would be able to keep the resources that they had on their land. But no, the people with the money get to kick them out.
Yup. And that is and here's another thing that always bothers me. Like they talk about the state as this abstract thing, right? That
Yeah.
like no matter what, it's the source of whatever bad happened. So when something good happens, that's capitalism that they redefine as just, trading, which has literally always happened long before capital came into existence to even have a capitalism. But they talk about it as if it doesn't arise for a particular reason at a particular time with a particular class character, and it doesn't change and get revolutionized and have new characteristics. Like they treat the bourgeois state as just the state, how it always operates. And this is one of the reasons they can't understand the difference between genuine democracy and bourgeois democracy. They can't understand that when the working class gets together and fights back against the parasites doing nothing and taking everything, well, that's their free association, right? That's our choice. So fucking deal with it. I don't know what else to tell them at this point.
And it's honestly a failure. I think they see things frozen in their development, whereas we're able to admit that at some point capitalism was in fact historically progressive, but the progress has happened. We don't need this anymore.
Yeah, and even the idea of progress isn't necessarily their moral good that they base
exactly.
everything on. And it's funny because the right anarchists will like deny any connection to Proudhon and Bakunin, but they specifically go from a Proudhonist view of eternal justice. This was his premise for everything. There's just this eternal notion of justice that transcends time and history and that people just inherently have. And this is how we need to base everything around. I've had to reread a book by von Mises recently because I told that guy the guy from what was it, the pig movie Babe in the City, right?
That Lucifer
I
guy?
yeah, he plays the pig in the pig movie, right? That'll do, pig. That's not him? No? I don't know. But I told his buddy I would talk to him again because his buddy actually seemed kind of cool, but despite, being kind of a jerk at times. And he was like, okay, so well, originally he told me to read 5 books that he recommended me, and he would read 5 books I recommended him. And one,
I'm sure he would. Yeah, of course.
I don't think you're actually gonna do that, Michael. So let's just and 2, I am so busy, it's crazy. So let's just do 1. And so we picked one, and it was the Socialism book by von Mises, right? And so I've had to read that. And it's really evident when reading anything by von Mises that they can't see out of their own ideological blinders, right? They're utopians, so they have to treat everyone else as a utopian, right? Marxism can't be a science of understanding how development happens, and this sort of multifaceted change of cause and effect relationships and concretization, moments of development, all adding up to what is real. It has to just be, we have this conclusion, and then we work backwards from that to sort of give it a logical consistency, right? To make up an excuse for it. And that's how he operates. So he assumes everyone else does, but we don't. We aren't utopians. In fact, Marxism is sort of it exists to overcome utopianism. Zoya tells me that I've changed since I began owning pamphlets. Yes, I have. I'm not proud of it, but I own him. I do. What are you gonna do? I'll try to make sure that I'm magnanimous in my ownership, and generous. Well, let's be real. I'm just going to be real mean to him.
Yeah, and the funniest thing is when they call Marxism a religion, because that's in essence how they're operating.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%. And I think that one comes from there's this guy that's been running from a debate with Haas and me and Eddie for like a year now, James Lindsay.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Which is funny because the guy like complains that wokes won't debate, and I mean he won't debate a Marxist. Really, all you talk about is Marxism, yet can't confront someone from the Communist Party. Seems a little cowardly there, Jimmy. But no, he like has this notion that Marxism is a Gnostic religion, right? Which is silly. And like if you actually look for his reasoning, like he completely misunderstands what dialectics is, and von Mises does too. There's actually a section in like the first section of that book where he basically says that Marxist dialectics is just using words that have multiple meanings in order to confuse people.
Nice.
He seriously says that, right? And so I'm laughing as I'm reading this because when this guy, the actor guy, the guy who played the pig in the Simpsons movie, Spider Pig,
Oh,
that
guy. Yeah.
yeah. When his friend and I were talking, the book I gave him was actually a doctoral dissertation, and it's, in my opinion, pretty advanced, but it's one of the best descriptions of what's actually happening in Marxist capital in the world, right? So I'm like, well, read this and you'll see what we're actually talking about, right? Because everything Marx is doing, he's showing you. He's not coming out and telling you. And when you think on the surface, the way these guys tend to, you can't understand that, right? All you're seeing is like, oh my God, all this boring information comparing coats and linens, and I don't care, right? But that's not all that's happening. He's actually explaining how things become concrete in the real world. He's putting together a system of categories that'll become, when he's done, the sum of diverse determinations, which is what Marx calls the concrete or the real, right? So I gave him this, and like I'm thinking as I'm reading von Mises, like even just like opening this book is going to show him Von Mises is lying to him. So I'm wondering if he's going to admit that or not. Because I'm supposed to talk to him, I think, next week. I don't know. It's in my calendar. But
Yeah, I'm
who knows?
curious
He
to
may
see
not.
what mental gymnastics he'll have, or maybe he'll just admit straight up that you're right.
I've never run into a single guy like this who will admit that.
Yeah, yeah.
It takes a very long time. Like they have to actually begin learning Marxism because right now he's setting out to debunk it, right?
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
reading this in order to go, okay, this is wrong, and that is wrong, right? Which is different because when I first read Von Mises, it was to see what it was about, right? Like I want to learn what this guy is saying. I'm not going in there with a preconception, but whatever. I don't know.
And that's why I don't like straight up arguments like that either, because it's like, even if I disagree with you, I might have argued in the same way before I, spent 2-3 years reading stuff. It's like I can't really give you the entire context in a little conversation. It's not going to be productive for either of us.
Right. Oh, exactly. Anyway, we've been yakking for a minute now. We got an awesome show today. Mac from the RTSG think tank is going to be here. We're going to be talking about the Spanish Civil War and debunking anti-communist lies about it. I'm super excited. So let's bring him on, huh? All right, Mac, we need you to get your camera on, brother, and we will bring you on the stage. Here we go. How you doing tonight, brother? Great to have you back.
Yeah, good evening, good evening. Just can you tell me, can you hear me fine and everything?
Yes.
Because, all right.
You're good.
I have these new headphones and whatever. Yeah, I'm doing well. It's a bit earlier than usual, as we mentioned. The daylight savings kind of went over my head.
Daylight
So
savings
it's a very
is one of the
medieval.
yeah. Look it
tradition
up
that
on the
still
internet.
exists.
It's such a stupid and outdated idea.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, I'm doing quite well. It's a pleasure to be on as always, and I guess I'll introduce myself as I do. So
Yeah, do it up, brother.
I'm Mac from RTSG. I'm like an analyst and a writer for RTSG, and RTSG is a research collective. We mostly deal with politics, with political philosophy, theory, with epistemology, theology, even China, contemporary communist governments, and all sorts of analysis. And we have a Substack, which is where we publish our larger essays. So that's RTSG on Substack, and we also have 2 Twitter accounts actually. So we have RTSG main, which is kind of our general RTSG underscore main, and we also have our RTSG underscore news, which is basically a news account. And we, as with everything, we try to be always as reliable as possible and relatively unbiased. And yeah, that's about it as far as formalities go, I would say.
I'm assuming that you guys have reported on my ownership of this pamphlets guy.
Yes, that was breaking news in the past few days.
Yep.
All the experts are analyzing the but yeah, no, I mean, everything you guys were talking about, I mean, I'm not here to talk about the stuff that you did, but I watched the debate, if you can call it the debate, with you, Haas, and the guy who ruined Lost, is it?
Yeah.
And his guy who stabbed something or someone, I should say, or whatever. That was an interesting debate.
Haas kind of just showed up and ate their lunch, I think.
Yeah, no, Haas, but listen, they accuse Haas, he just proved himself to be this vulgar maniac and whatever. But when Haas joined the stream, like, they attacked him immediately in a very, very impolite way. Like, it was not, I didn't, I guess it's, who started, blah, blah, blah. It's sometimes childish to talk about that, but you cannot expect someone to be completely like civil towards you and whatnot when you immediately attack them when they join.
Yeah. And I noticed it was, I try to let people get their entire point out. right? Like I want to hear what they're saying anytime I'm talking to anyone, debating them, whatever. Except they seem to have an issue with me doing that, right? And maybe it was just the dynamics of there were two of them and one of me before Haas came in.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seemed that like I would get the lead up to my point in, and before I actually got to it, one of them would be like, yeah, bup, 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 and I'd have to go off on this side thing, and it was a mess. And like honestly, I couldn't care less what their personal ethical codes are. I really couldn't, right? Like I want to know like the actual substance. I hate to say it, like I was kind of bored most of the time. Like I'm like, yeah.
No, it was not very interesting. I mean, American Capitalist Party, is it? I mean, that's like calling a party like a capitalist party, that already is dubious, like in itself. And then when they went into their like ethics and whatnot, and if anything, has got a good gotcha in where he said, okay, so you're like for this NAP type of thing or whatever, non-aggression pact, or what the libertarians want.
Well,
But simultaneously, you're advocating for basically killing people who disagree with you, like for thought crimes. I mean, that's like the opposite. That's like the Orwellian stereotype of authoritarianism.
It seems like they're just living in this opposite land, because they started this capitalist party, right? But if you go on their group's website, they're just asking people for money.
Yeah, that's also, what kind of weird universe is this where the ACP, American Communist Party, is like entrepreneurial and whatnot, and the Capitalist Party is the one who's begging people for
asking for
donations or whatever, handouts. Yeah, handouts. Yeah, I bet they love that term. So yeah, that's a very that's an interesting discussion that happened. But this kind of idealism and ideological dogmatism, this is something that we saw with these people and with the anarchists historically, and that's also happening with leftists today. The ones that are attacking the ACP and whatnot, and what kind of happened in Spain, as we'll see. Now, just to kind of premise this, I think today will be short and sweet. You guys had a slightly longer introduction, and as opposed to one of the previous streams where we were talking about the entirety of the pre-war European diplomacy, this is one of the events in that period. So, there is no need to go into like super duper detail.
We'll have more time.
It's just a more limited topic. Yeah.
And we'll have a lot more time for your questions tonight. So stick around, because Mac is going to stay and answer them. This is actually what's really cool for me is I'm not all that well read on the Spanish Civil War. So I'm going to be learning a lot tonight too. So I'm really excited about that. So any questions you have about that, by all means, ask them. Or if you got some beef with me, or if you've been in, I don't know, if you played the Mouse in Mighty Mouse back in the day or something, and you want to debate me, you can do that too. Just call, join the voice chat. Anyway, the floor is yours. But why don't you tell everybody where you're from? Because I'm looking at the chat and seeing that asked a couple times.
Yeah, I'm from Croatia. I'm from Croatia, born and raised. And I don't plan on leaving to Germany in a few years, as is kind of the trend. I mean, the geographic trend in Croatia and all of Eastern Europe, all these countries lost like 25% of their population in the past 20 or 30 years. So yeah, I'm still here in this hole. But I like it. I love Croatia. I'm a patriot. Let's go.
As are all communists.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay. Well, let's like dig right into it. What are some of the like really big? Because I know some of the sort of mythology about this, right? Like anarchists are always like, no, there was an anarchist society. We promise it was in Spain, and the CNTFAI, who were kind of like constantly in debt and crisis and asking the Republic for money. And they're like, well, no, this is a perfect anarchist society, we promise, right? So that's like really what I know about it. Are there other really big anti-communist myths about it?
Yeah, I suppose there are, although the way I just conceptually thought about how I would go through this, it would be kind of chronological, right? So I just wanted to,
Let's do that.
but we'll get to that. It's interesting, kind of the contrast between what the anarchists were saying that they were doing in Catalonia primarily, and the reality. I mean, the anarchists, they kind of had their own version of like wartime gulags and quite stringent like prison policy and all kinds of political executions and imprisonments during the whole time that their project was going on. You know, I mean, at least on surface, that doesn't sound very anarchistic.
they sort of like created the idea of concentration camps, right? Like putting a concentrated amount of a particular type of person in a prison in the one, or in a certain prison, right?
Yeah. I mean, very quickly, you know, I guess, you know, the excuse, I guess, that they make, you know, it's something similar to what is the excuse for Zelensky banning all political parties in Ukraine today. You know, it's a wartime situation. We cannot be, you know, in case of Ukraine, like fully Western and democratic. And in case of anarchists, you know, we have to be pragmatic and we had to have these temporary authoritarian measures. But, you know, it just doesn't, at that point, what even is the point of their dogmatism, which only they kind of thought in their head, but their practice was completely different. Why did they even create like a civil war inside a civil war against the communists at that point? But, you know, I'll just give a brief context of the European situation today, or not today, but in 1936. And, you know, this is after Hitler already came to power. Rhineland, the remilitarization of Rhineland just happened and whatnot. And this is also when the first big collective security initiative failed. So the Eastern Pact was, which was a Soviet initiative to create kind of multilateral defense thing in Europe against fascism, that failed, basically. So at this point, the Soviet foreign policy was in a bit of a crisis, and it was kind of chronically in this period. But moreover, this was also peak of appeasement. So basically what happened when the war started, the British immediately, so the war started, the Civil War, that is, Spanish Civil War, started around mid-July. You know, it's slightly ambiguous. I think 17th of July is kind of the accepted date. And already by end of July, the British were completely against providing, or actually not just providing, but they actively sabotaged the ability of the legitimate Republican government, which was liberal, by the way. You know, it was a kind of left-leaning government. It was not a communist or even like a super, like even a socialist government in this sense of the word. So it was a completely, you know, aligned with France and Britain ideologically government. But even then, the British were completely ended any kind of possibility for them to buy weapons. And that kind of progressed. There was an interesting moment because France at this time also had a Popular Front government. And, you know, during Bloom. So you would expect France and Spain to have some kind of a military collaboration and whatever. And that did happen initially. But then there was an interesting moment. So here it says the British ambassador to France, he informed the French, if France should find herself in conflict with Germany as a result of having sold war materials to Spanish government, England would consider herself released from her obligations under the Locarno Pact and would not come to help. In other words, the British were giving the French an ultimatum that if they continued to support Spain, that they would basically end the Locarno Pact, which was the treaty which kind of was safeguarding, let's say, peace in Western Europe after World War I. So and obviously the French is always obliged. Bloom's government.
Well, they are the French
officially. Yeah, no, it's such a funny, like there was at least 20 examples in these 5 years from Hitler to World War II, where the French completely changed their policy unwillingly because of English pressure. It's kind of incredible how much of a trend that is. Even when the British were like basically intervening in French domestic policy, which is kind of taboo in diplomacy. Anyway, so yeah, by like July 22nd, 23rd, Blum was forced to reverse his decision on aid to the Republican government. Although admittedly they did send some planes in secret, but it was, you know, in a much smaller capacity than it otherwise would have been. And then in 1935 already, or the 1935, the Neutrality Act that United States passed was modified to include the Spanish Civil War as one of the areas where American diplomacy is not supposed to intervene. But it still allowed private companies to sell certain material like oil to the rebels, aka Franco, through Portugal. So in many ways, this whole non-intervention policy was yeah. All right, I think we took over the stream again. See, RTSG Deep State. Anyway, I read your message now, but yeah. So the whole non-intervention policy that the West was applying was really kind of one-sided. When the non-intervention committee was formed later, which Germany, Italy, and Portugal were all members of, these countries had absolutely zero interest in obliging by any of the terms and conditions that were kind of legally binding by them being in the non-intervention committee. So in effect, what happened is that all the pro-Franco countries were sending weapons illegally to Spain, while, you know, the good moral Western governments, that Britain and France, they were obliging by their legal obligation of non-intervention. So now we kind of get to the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union, you know, from the start of the war, they immediately gave humanitarian aid to Spain, but it took them almost 2 months to define a military, let's say, aid strategy to Spain. The Soviets were kind of balancing still this collective security diplomacy, which obliged them to, I'm using that word too much, obliged, but, you know, it was necessary. You know, if they wanted to pass collective security, they had to be on good terms with France and Britain, because France and Britain were instrumental in any kind of a collective security agreement. So Litvinov was playing ball with the British and the French by joining the non-intervention committee, and nominally at the beginning, for again about 2 months, neither the Comintern nor the Soviet government offered, let's say, any support to Spain. Obviously, when they realized how ridiculous the situation was, the Soviets sent a lot of aid, even though it was never published in the press. Never did they officially kind of admit that they were sending weapons to Spain and whatnot. There was a funny, actually, quote by Ribbentrop, who, you know, also realized the situation with the non-intervention committee from his perspective of Germany, and he said, non-intervention committee might have been better called the intervention committee. So, you know, even if Joachim von Ribbentrop is admitting that situation, I think it's relatively safe to say that indeed this was a completely one-sided agreement, the non-intervention committee. So around August, the first Soviet attachés were coming to Spain, and as soon as they were coming, you know, it wasn't just diplomats and kind of political attachés, which was the boogeyman of the anarchists and whatnot, but there was, you know, all kinds of military, naval, air experts, military attachés in general, not just these like political spies or whatever the boogeyman was. Although, yeah, you know, it's probably safe to say that the Soviets also had an intelligence network in Spain that formed through these military aid channels. Now, just to kind of recite the very popular numbers, which are well known and accepted in every official historiography about the amount of equipment that the Soviets sent to Spain. So that was around 800 aircraft, 350 tanks, around 100 armored cars, 1,500 artillery pieces, 500,000 rifles, 340 grenade launchers, 15,000 machine guns, 100,000 aerial bombs, and like 4 million rounds of ammunition, 500,000 grenades, all sorts of stuff, as well as a bunch of gunpowder, oil, and everything else. So, when you think about this period, 1936, where tank technology, for example, was still relatively primitive, 800 aircraft and 350 tanks, this was a very, very substantial force as far as equipment goes.
Yeah, I want to jump in here real quick, because this is one of the myths that I've heard, that the Soviets weren't helping, right? They were leaving the Spanish Republic to the mercy of the Phalanges and the other reactionary forces.
After these, as I said, first a month and a half of hesitation due to external goals in foreign policy, there was a steady and consistent influx of a lot of military equipment and humanitarian aid, which started immediately. That's also shouldn't be
well, they were sending troops,
ignored,
right?
The troops were being sent through the international brigades. They couldn't. It would be too much of a scandal for them to Attachés were fine, and these military experts as advisors and whatnot. And it's very well known that these the war in Spain was pretty ideological, let's say. So that's why you had the international brigades, but also you had a lot of civilians, peasants, who never really used firearms that much, who joined the Republicans and whatnot. And because of this, these were informal units that just kind of spawned out of nowhere. And it was very hard for the existing military structures that the Spanish army had that was loyal to the Republic to incorporate and organize all these kind of civilians, basically, that were volunteering. So the attachés, the Soviet professional military advisors, were kind of crucial in stabilizing the whole military structure of the Republican Army.
And the modern warfare, right? I mean, again, they were peasants who never really used weapons.
Yeah, let alone tanks and armored cars.
Exactly. Famously, the old Communist Party here in the U.S. sent a brigade called the Abraham Lincoln Brigades, right? I forget. I think it was 100 people. I could be wrong. But yeah, so they were from all over, and mostly communist parties were sending people. Anyway, go on. I don't mean to interrupt.
A lot of revolutionaries. If I'm not mistaken, Josip Broz Tito was also in the international brigades. A lot of these communists that later on became influential in one way or another in their countries were kind of hardened in Spain, and that whole experience really kind of made them into warriors, professional revolutionaries, as they say. Now, I kind of, that's more or less that as far as this context and the statistics of military equipment and blah, blah, blah. I kind of now wanted to go into the anarchist coup situation.
Yeah. I was hoping we could, I could pose it in the framing of a question. So what exactly, because I mean, on the surface, the anarchists were against the fascists, right? What makes them sort of end up being what we call a fifth column, right? Them and the Trotskyites, the POUM. Why do they end up serving the interests of the Phalange and Franco?
Yeah, fifth column, I didn't use that term in a while, but that's a good way to describe it. Basically, in effect, what happened is, the anarchists, the way they acted, in effect, had the effect of completely destabilizing the Madrid. Primarily, this was all happening around Madrid, and creating this literally a military conflict inside a military conflict, while nominally you're fighting this greater enemy who's surrounding you, is obviously going to have the effect of weakening all the forces that are fighting against the greater enemy, in this case,
So
Franco.
if I have it sort of right, like the Republic controls Madrid, right? And this is a huge piece of the war. And at the
Okay, I'll just
time,
say this was all in 1939. So this is, and especially after Barcelona fell, there was very big. This is kind of the liberal, or I won't just say liberal, but kind of the surface level at the very least explanation for this was that all these generals and whatnot in the Spanish military kind of, they were getting blackpilled by the situation in the war. Now, the anarchists. All right, you go ahead first, and then I'll.
No, so I just want to see if like my understanding is correct, because like I said, like I don't know a lot about this. So like as Franco is heading towards Madrid, right? Like steadily taking ground, like you're saying, the officers are getting kind of nihilistic, and the anarchists, along with the anti-communists, the Trots, called the POUM, the POUM, they decide that now is the perfect time to stage their proletarian uprising in Madrid.
Yeah, that's exactly when we talk about what they achieved in effect. When you describe the situation, it becomes very obvious in which interest it is to, like, I mean, it's command and conquer, or not command, divide and conquer. It's basically they did that to themselves. Like they conquered, or they divided and conquered themselves in the face of in that moment by far the most reactionary force. And in fact, in this sense, anarchists were the reactionaries also. They were on their side.
They obviously, like, materially side with the reactionaries by attacking the Republic, right?
No, but you don't understand. They were progressives and leftists,
Well, that's how they. Yeah, you're only what you call yourself. I promise. It's funny because in one of Marx's earliest political economy essays, Wage, Labor, and Capital, he likens the capitalist sort of battlefield to soldiers, right? And he's saying that, like, it's like being at war with another army, but also at war with the soldiers in your own ranks at the same time, right? So you're always weakening yourself at the same time as you are going to war against someone else. And this is precisely what the anarchists end up doing. Now, what I'm fuzzy on, though, is what happens next after this. So they staged their uprising and clearly weaken the Republic.
There are a few more details that are interesting just before the coup happened, right?
Okay, let's go. Yeah, let's go into those then.
The coup happened on March 5th, 1939. And in the meantime, pardon, I'm a bit sick.
No excuse, man. What the hell?
Yeah.
No, it's okay, brother.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
The movement above everything. The anarchists were, I feel like, from the very beginning, very kind of skeptical about the Soviet, or they say even Russian influence, Russian dependence, or the Spanish government's dependence on the Russians. And they saw all these attaches and whatever as signs that after the war would end, the goal of the USSR would be to kind of convert Spain and actually coup the Republican government and set up a communist government. Now, that's on surface level not okay. First of all, I don't know of any official, any Soviet foreign policy communications where this was like a stated goal or anything that they were actually trying to do. And also on surface level, it's completely disaligned with Soviet foreign policy at this time, which, as I mentioned during Litvinov, was actually appeasing towards Britain and France, for them to even conceive of something so radical when they were even hesitant on sending military help in for the first month or two. It's there would have to be some really, really good evidence that this was the idea, the Soviet plan. And I'm not aware of any such evidence. So in early 1939, the anarchists were, they were firmly opposed to what they saw as like an unreal communist dictatorship. This is how they called the Republican government during this time. The president was Najir, right? Yeah. I don't know Spanish, but I'll just call him Najir. So there was at one moment, I think on March 3rd, a reshuffling of some of the bureaucratic and military positions in the government, where a few more communists got those positions that they were replaced. Some of these positions were replaced by communists. And for anarchists, this was like, that this was like the clear clue of a coup.
Look out, the evil authoritarians are taking power.
Yeah. So, and it's
I'm sure
very
out,
interesting.
Screaming gibberish, etc.
They were so when that happened, they were starting to talk about like a open communist dictatorship that is forming. Now, Casado, who was one of the, again, pronunciation, whatever, of course, in Casado, he was one of the, no, he was not an anarchist, I don't think. I mean, he was aligned with them, but he came from the military, strictly. He was a general who was one of the main guys who started the coup and whatnot. Now, he actually, so Casado, here, I'll just quote this citation that I have. Casado maintained contacts with nationalist agents active in Madrid. On February 15, he received confirmation that Franco was ready to enter talks on Republican surrender. From then onwards, during the following 3 weeks, so mid-February to early March, when the coup happened, there was continuous communication between Casado and the nationalists. The former was already determined to organize a coup against, so Casado was already determined to organize a coup against Najir, aka the Republican government. So this idea that the anarchists were like scared of this immediate sudden communist takeover, and they were planning this for at least a few months beforehand, seems, kind of dubious.
To say the least.
And what's funny here is nationalists. So nationalists demanded also that an anti-Najir coup be mounted as soon as possible, possibly already in February 1939. So you have Franco's
March
agents who are telling the anarchists and the rebels, let's say, in the military, that they want them to start this coup as soon as possible. The obvious conclusion is that they are saying this so that they can crush Madrid, right? But I guess they had some very dubious idea that Franco was going to negotiate with them after this coup, when they open the gates to the nationalists or whatever. I don't know. It's so dubious, this whole situation.
It seems kind of weird. I mean, so the Franco's forces are sending these letters to him in February. Then they do the coup in March, like early March 5th, you said, right?
Yeah.
So like basically, depending on when in February they're sending these, like 2 months top passes between that. Like, to me, it seems like, well, maybe since it's such an ideological struggle, they were like, well, we're more similar to the nationalists than the communists, right? Which is, I mean, that was just the case with anarchists back then, especially the syndicalists, right? Which is the large force of anarchists in Spain. So maybe, but I don't know, man.
The anarchists,
dubious.
Yeah, the anarchists, at the very least, their demographics, the people who were closer to the Franco people, so these kind of urban officers and whatever, were actually, again, like demographically similar to the anarchists, who were also mostly urbanites, not peasants, definitely. They didn't like the peasants, actually. And so at least in this sense, they had like a similar background, similar people who were phalangists and these kind of like ideological intellectuals from both sides were on a similar frequency. I don't know too much, how far in conclusions we can go about that. But I do know, because I watched it in preparation to this, that Haas has there's a short clip by Talent of Haas's stream where he talks about this specifically, kind of the way that the syndicalist tradition mutated or whatever into fascism, both in Italy and in Germany.
Yeah,
So,
it's like earlier I was talking about this, right? It's people these days don't understand that like fascism really is like doctrinarily like grown out of like the doctrines in fascism come out of anarchist traditions. Like the anarchists in Italy basically become the black shirts, right?
mm,
And even in Russia, like there was a big link between the Black Hundreds and the fascists, right? So like this notion in the West today that anarchism is left wing somehow is just wrong. And
that's
it comes about
probably like it
during
came
this.
out of a hippie movement and late Cold War, where it was kind of reappropriated.
And the new left era
Probably.
too. Yeah.
New
yeah.
left, yeah.
But sorry, I don't want to get us sidetracked.
Yeah. So there is kind of an interesting just summary. According to some sources, the coup was initially planned for March 4th, precipitated by Najir's nominations on March 3rd. This is what I said earlier. It was literally only a few people. I think like 4 or 5, like half a dozen, maybe a dozen positions. So really not that big of a cabinet shift in total numbers. And they say, so precipitated by Najir's nominations on March 3rd, they were perceived as full communist takeover by the anarchists. So this is very, it's almost hard to rationalize why the anarchists in this moment during the Civil War had such a big aversion to like communists or whatever. Obviously, so the coup happens. It was really kind of brutal. A few hundred or a few thousand even people died. Here there is a quote: "The scale of killings is unclear. Executions backed by some sort of judicial proceedings were few, and the best known case is this of Barcelo. However, some protagonists claim that later that there were hundreds of communist inmates murdered in prisons or makeshift detention centers." So this is kind of what we mentioned earlier, what the anarchists were doing with quasi concentration camps or wartime gulags or whatever, including disposing them in the sewers. And the anarchist and socialist press commenced a rapid campaign against Najir and the communists. So even in press and whatever. But obviously, so the coup happens, they succeed, the anarchists and whatever. And Madrid falls in this sense. And obviously, as soon as that happens, surprise, surprise, Franco had no interest in any kinds of negotiations. I mean, think about it this way: like, why would Franco in that scenario is in a better position because the people that he was supposed to fight were divided, killing themselves amongst each other. There was like a third of let's say 3/5 of defenders that were previously in Madrid were now left. So Franco was in objectively a better position after the anarchists did their coup, motivated mostly by paranoia of a communist takeover or whatever.
And I just want to add that this sort of divide and conquer technique wasn't new then, and it continues on today. Like in different sort of situations, look at the people who sort of want everyone today, like in the working class in America, to fight each other rather than the ruling class, right? As long as we're fighting each other, we're weakening ourselves for the actual material enemy to just steamroll over us, just like Franco steamrolled over Madrid.
there isn't much to say about concrete anarchist failures after the coup. The coup happened, which was a failure in itself on a strategic level, and then on March, like around mid-March or late March 1939, the anarchists got an official reply from Franco saying that he was not going to accept their negotiating kind of attaché or whatever to make a conditional peace. So he just flat out rejected any kind of negotiations, and the war ended. So the war ended on April 1st, and the coup happened on March 3rd or 5th, and Franco gave the anarchists an official response that he will not negotiate with them on March 19th. So between that and the end of the war, there was like 11 days. And that was kind of it, basically, not completely. But it was the worst possible situation for all sides, because the chaos that was created by the coup and whatever completely hampered any kind of attempts to evacuate civilians, for example. Basically, the summary executions that happened after Franco came were much more brutal. I guess more people than would have been otherwise happened. I kind of phrased that weirdly, but you understand what I mean.
Yeah. Well, here's my thing. Even during the sort of, I forget how long like Catalonia was under CNT FAI rule before this.
It was like
it wasn't a super long time. I want to say like a year tops. I could be, like I said, I know very little about this, but during the entire time, like they're trying all these anarchy sort of policies and end up like destroying everything. Right? Like they made work optional at one point, and so nobody went to work. Right? There's like a whole bunch of horrible humanitarian disasters regarding nuns and the church. There's a thing where they were basically like moving their only vehicles from town to town to share them, so they weren't where they were needed at necessary times, just because they were going on their principle of sharing and equality and whatever, rather than who needs these vehicles. It's like little things like this. Their Secretary of Treasury or whoever was constantly in debt and constantly begging the Republic for money. But anyway, that's all like a whole. I mean, we can do a whole thing about that sometime.
There is actually, sorry,
No, go ahead,
there was an interesting kind of thing that happened in Revolutionary Catalonia or whatever it's called. It was the May Days. I don't know if you're aware of that, which was basically not a lot of people, or not a lot of people. I don't think there is a consensus in historiography who started the May Days, but the May Days were basically a period in May of like 1937, where the anarchists and the communists like actively fought each other for like a week or something like that. And this was in 1937, so this is 2 years before, just about 2 years before the coup and whatever. The anarchists are saying that that the communists were using like Stalinist NKVD agents to kidnap anarchist leaders and whatnot. And the communists, I don't even know what the communist line on this exactly is. I think they just were kind of flabbergasted that this conflict is happening in the first place between them, because
I mean,
it was just,
let's be real. Like, anarchists are almost never a force to be taken seriously. So, like, if I were to guess, I'd be like, "Who are these people? Why are they doing this?" I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah, no, I mean, they, after Spain especially, I don't know if we can even call this a serious anarchist project. I don't know if anything, like, what is the historical legacy of anarchism?
It ends in Spain.
I think
it
they're
turns into
really
fascism, right? But Like,
I think anarchists really need to complement that. Okay, so you have like Makhno, I guess, in Ukraine, who was like some guy, like a gang member, basically gang
basically like a
leader,
bandit. Yeah.
who was pillaging random villages and whatnot. And then I guess Spain is next, and in Spain you have anarchists starting a civil war against communists, which in effect helped Franco completely demolish or take over Madrid like rapidly. So this was like their big success. This was their most influential thing that they did in the war, was probably the coup in Madrid in 1939 that we were just talking about. And after that, you had I know, like in the very south of Mexico, I forgot what their name was, like on border with like Belize.
Yeah,
something.
like the
What are they called?
Zapatistas, like the early
Zapatistas, yeah. But interestingly, Zapatistas actually disbanded just a few years ago. They lasted for a few decades.
And they
it was kind of
like smaller sort of, like there's like 2 different juntas and then just like little communities now.
Yeah, it was, there was no, you look at communist, okay, so it's kind of crazy. So you have anarchist projects, you have a small rebellion in the south of Mexico where nothing really happened. Like, it's whatever. And then you have a communist experiment, aka China today, which like lifted 1 billion people out of poverty in 20 or 30 years or whatever, and is currently like the global superpower, measured by PPI, purchasing power parity, and whatnot. Like the absolute kind of like the amount of dogma that you have to kind of say that the communist projects were fake or failures or whatever, when they created 2 global superpowers, as opposed to a bandit whatever civil war inside a civil war, and
the Zapatistas who don't really even call themselves anarchists.
Yeah, I heard that too.
I think they like say,
but Western anarchists, Western anarchists, they just like hug
they're
them.
so desperate.
You are ours now.
Right.
Like they need something. So
they need anything but communists for some reason. They don't like winning. I think, I don't know.
They don't like winning at all. It's a weird kind of failure fetish or something. It definitely connects to the dogmatism of leftists in general that you were talking about earlier, and dogmatism in general, ideological. But when you have today you have leftists that are manically and completely in crazy fed tactic ways attack the ACP. And what is the realistic kind of in effect? Like, what is the effect of that? So you're weakening the communist that's anti-communism. Let's say that the leftists, did something crazy and it led to the destruction of the ACP. Like, what is the effect? The effect is now that you've you destroyed one of the organized communist movements that has, however members that it has, and you've objectively helped like the much more reactionary elements in your country. You sabotage worker organization and all sorts of initiatives. And you opened a political vacuum that was previously maybe filled by the ACP and that now can be filled by other more reactionary currents. So just based on their weird dogmatism, not to mention that a lot of it is based on social issues, which should be secondary for any communist. Even they say nominally that class struggle is number one, but in reality, always like stuff like trans issues are not just number one, but like number absolutely like beyond everything.
Dude, big they them is always watching, always.
Yeah. So for them, that is make or break, and they are willing to literally sabotage communist projects or petty ideological disagreements, and what they're doing, the wrecking that they're doing, is in effect weakening the entire leftist movement in this example in America. So I think you can almost one-to-one draw parallels here with like Danny Shaw would be like poem, and the ACP is like Najir, and Franco is like, you know, the feds or whatever.
And you know, like I sort of, a lot of these people aren't stupid enough to not be able to learn from this history. So it really makes you question their motives, right? Like we can forgive, well, maybe not forgive the anarchists in Spain, but understand their ideological fervor as inexperienced. In America in 2025, when we have all
There's no
of these
excuses.
failures to learn from, there's no excuse. So if you're just ignorant of it, it's still your fault. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like you have the
it
internet,
is.
you can learn this stuff.
You know, it's what is the Mao quote? No investigation, no right to speak. You know, now that is more relevant than ever because of the information technology, fucking internet,
Yeah.
and everything. Everything is at your fingertips. You know, and it's okay. You know, if you don't know something, you don't know about it. But if you don't know, no right to speak. Like, why would you go and attack something, but you're completely clueless about the topic? So
Why would
either
you
at that
make
point you're really dumb,
crazy,
or you have exterior motives, right?
like
Like there is,
you make up the most insane lies, right? Like
yeah,
running guns and other insane nonsense. You know what I
yeah.
mean? There,
Come on, why did they go with that? That's such a,
well, I mean,
that's like when Saddam Hussein like rigged the elections, or I don't know, maybe it was someone else, and then he got like 110% of the vote. You know, at least make it like 70%. You know,
Right.
you're good, bro. Like you don't need to create this ridiculous obfuscation.
And that was like
Whatever. So,
right after his cousin, who was way more popular than him, died. Like,
yeah.
you don't think there were any Qasim loyalists at all? Okay, whatever.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting, I guess, parallel also.
Maybe we'll get some calls about that tonight. Why don't we get into those, because we're already like, this was such an informative one for me. I'm really glad we did this one. But
Yeah. Let me just join the Discord.
get on in here, brother. I got the screen
So
share.
you need to like mute me and whatever on
Yes,
Discord.
I'm gonna mute you
your
on
side.
here as soon as you're in the Discord. Is that you? That's Sebastian, though. You got to join first. Or should I mute you in the Discord and not here? I'll mute you in the Discord. No. Okay, you're muted here. That's fine. All right, Sebastian. Who is our first call, brother?
What's up? Yeah, our first caller is from Twitter. It's Golden Redder, who wants to debate you on Holodomor.
Oh, he wants to debate me on Holodomor. You got to pull Mac in, by the way. Remember?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. What's his name? What's his name, Sebastian?
Golden Redder.
Golden Redder?
Yeah.
Golden Redder. All right, Golden Redder.
Variation of that, golden, red, redder, anything, any variation works.
Can I call you GR?
Yeah, that works. That's my profile picture anyway.
Okay, I'm gonna call you GR. Go ahead, GR. The floor is yours, sir.
All right. I remember, I'm not sure if you remember, but we had a little spat on X like a couple days ago.
I don't mean any offense, but like so many people bother me on X that it's impossible for me to remember all of them. Sorry, man.
Yeah.
So what's you have a problem with me and it revolves around Holodomor?
Yeah, but when you were doing the Holodomor,
just one moment.
Let me pick up the tweet.
No,
again.
am I echoing for you, or did you sort it out? You should just.
You're good. You're good. Go ahead, Mac.
All right.
So GR,
what's
kind
the
of cut
question?
out for a minute there. Can you repeat what you said?
Yeah. All right. So it was about the other few days ago when you were talking about how the Holodomor was. If I can bring that tweet back up. Wrong one.
Yeah, I mean, I know like enough about the Holodomor.
Yeah, when someone's bringing up the Holodomor, you claim that it wasn't real.
Correct. It is not. Well, that's sort of a misnomer, I guess. Maybe that was me sort of simplifying for X, but I don't want to say that there wasn't a famine. There was. But this notion of a Holodomor where Stalin was like starving everybody and eating their babies and whatnot. Like, that's not true. There's the leading theory on this is from, not a communist guy or anything, a famine expert named Mark Taugert. And he has addressed this narrative specifically and points to the main causes being rodent infestations, a very bad grain disease called rust, and inclement weather. Now, in this region of Ukraine, famines had happened frequently for the last few hundred years, right? And there was one in Volga only a few years before that. So the notion that it was Stalin being evil and wanting to kill people, or it was just incompetence, is just not true. Now, people starved and died. Other people tried to hoard their grain, and the central authority was trying to feed and save as many lives as possible. So they were requisitioning grain, right? They were taking it from hoarders. At the same time, you have counter-revolutionaries and Nazis trying to take advantage of the situation, doing things like letting grain rot on the stalk, right? Slaughtering livestock and just leaving it, and trying to drive the prices up during a famine, right? So it's all of this put together that creates the tragedy of the famine in 32 in Ukraine. And it wasn't just Ukraine that was suffering, right? All over was suffering. Kazakhstan got hit really bad too. But that's the basic gist of it.
Yeah, I'm bringing it up because I have here an order from the USSR, which has been recorded, luckily, and translated to English. It goes as follows: January 22, 1933. The CCP, not the CCP, the CCAUCP and the Council of People's Commissioners in the USSR have received reports on the mass flights of peasants, quotation marks, for bread, and quotation, to the central Black Earth outpost.
You're talking about closing the borders between the SSRs.
Yes, during the Ukrainian famine, there was an order to shut down.
Yeah. No, this is actually, it sounds bad on paper, but when you think about it logically, right? If you have a town that has 100,000 people and it can only sustain 100,000 people in this moment, if you get then 50,000 peasants going from the villages to these cities, what's going to happen is that not just the population of the town, but all those peasants are also going to starve to even a higher level that they would have otherwise. Basically, during famines, it's relatively common practice to restrict movement because you can create chain reactions of people from villages going to the towns, and then the whole town is starving, and then everyone from the towns is going to another town, which also then goes to start starving. Basically,
right. They basically go through all of the supplies in a town because it's over. There's too many people there.
Yes,
you got to remember how
supply lines in famines cannot handle a sudden increase of population. That's basically the gist of it.
Right. You also have to remember how the technology was in 1932 and 33. Right. A lot of these deliveries were being made literally with horse and buggy. Right. Like they were using trains, yes, but not all the time. And they were still connecting the whole country. Right. The revolution had only happened just like a dozen years ago or 20 years ago, maybe. And so they're still building things up. It's not like today where, we could send an entire fleet of trucks and it would be there overnight. Right? Like they had to make sure that all of the logistics to send what little they had to get to as many people as possible were correct. And if you have, 50,000 people into a city that you weren't planning on having there, that screws up the entire rationing system, right? So like maybe that, like Max said, it sounds bad on paper. Oh yeah, they're restricting movement, but that's how you save lives. It's just a fact of reality,
Yeah. These big inner migrations just naturally would wreck supply lines and previously conceptualized plans of relief. Because as Simultaneously, as that decree was issued in 1933, so for example, by this point, export of grain completely stopped, almost completely, and this is when the biggest reliefs, supplies and bread and grain were being sent out. So it would be kind of weird for them to, from like a genocidal intent, restrict movement, but then simultaneously send those same people food. It's contradictory. The more logical thing is that both sending food and restricting movement had the same goal, and that was to prevent the spread of the famine.
All right.
So what do you think, GR?
You have
Did
other
you convince
examples
you?
of that, by the way.
What do you
I've
think, GR?
got like I'm not sure if you have the time, but I have like a lot of documents compiled.
Well,
Got the
I mean, we don't have like all the time in the world, but I want to
yeah. I
draw your
think you
attention.
said you ended
to,
in
hold
like 15 minutes.
Hold on,
right?
GR. Let me. I want to sort of, because we actually went kind of long today. I want to draw your attention to the first thing you brought up, right? So on the surface, when you have this narrative already in your head, it can sort of de facto make you think, okay, this narrative makes sense. But then when explained in the actual context, it doesn't really add up anymore. I guarantee you, any of these documents you're dealing with are going to have the same actual effect. So what I'd like you to do is go through the documents and think about whether or not there is any other rational explanation than something we have no direct evidence of, which is Stalin was making everyone eat their babies or whatever, or grow mustaches or whatever he's supposed to have done.
Well, I'm not claiming anything that extreme. Although technically, if I remember one of these documents, there was something about cannibalism becoming a problem. I'd have to look through it. There was a table.
I would probably accept that it happened on a very, very limited scale in some.
I mean, when people are starving, they do horrible things.
Yeah.
There
is, Russia historically is undergoverned. During, the USSR, chronically, you had an issue where Moscow, did not have any clue what is happening in, middle of Kazakhstan or middle of Alaska, for example, or not Alaska, but, Siberia.
Yeah.
So, I keep that into consideration. One argument that I'll just present that you didn't mention here is one of the biggest.
Mac, before you get to that, I just want to say, I want to say one thing, and this is one of the reasons Stalin was so popular in the Soviet Union, is because he was seen as cracking down on corrupt local officials that before him, they just didn't have the infrastructure to do. Like Stalin set out corruption teams that would go investigate corruption, hold management and local party officials accountable to the people. That's why my grandma loved Stalin, for instance. Even after they moved here to the U.S., she prayed for Stalin every night, long after he died. Anyway, go ahead, Mac.
Yeah, no, the incompetence of lower managers and whatever was often punished, which was perceived positively. I mean, kind of logically. But I wanted to say that a lot of this incompetence, my interpretation of the Holodomor puts a lot less emphasis on kulaks in either direction, negative or positive, quote unquote. But what often happened is that because of the, for example, crop rust, which Noam mentioned, you had sort of diseases that would spread through the grain in transport, for example, and whatnot. So what you had is peasants would, for example, they would have a harvest and they would wait, and they would say, obviously there is a primitive way of filtering grains which were rotten and whatever, but because of these diseases would spread through during transport and whatever, by the time that it reached distribution centers and similar, 20 or 30% of the grain would actually be destroyed by the time that it arrived. So the initial measurement, let's say, was 100. By the time that it arrived, it was 70 of X units. And then, that's let's say not like a not malign like sabotage by the peasants. It was literal technological restrictions and also logistical slash a disease, rust and similar crop diseases.
Actually, while you were
Infect-
saying that, I did find a document explaining that part, which was a famine in the Soviet Union from September 18th, 1933, which says the causes of the famine catastrophe. Well, let me skip that part. The real reason for the famines are being kept hidden. They can only be explained by enormous organizational and disruptional errors and the overextension of grain procurement measures.
Yeah, no, absolutely, because it's very hard for a system that's organized in this way to have such drastic, like if you're expecting 100 and you get 70, it's very, very hard to distribute it.
I mean, you can see why they needed to industrialize so quickly, right? And not only that, they knew the Nazis were coming to invade. And so remember, this is before the industrialization, sort of at the very beginning of it. Everything needed to be updated. And this is one of the reasons for the revolution, right? So that they could actually accomplish this and not just be stuck, dying in the Tsar's wars again, which is, one of the reasons the revolution was so popular. So like,
and also, if I just
go
very
ahead.
quickly, a lot of the perceived by the government perceived sabotage and whatnot was actually these sort of logistical mistakes that were kind of chronically and naturally, quote unquote, happening during the procurement process itself.
Right,
And
they
it
take
was-
time to
for them,
overcome.
it was so weird that this was happening. Yeah, that they attributed it often to sabotage, even if maybe it wasn't. But that's like a way in which you can rationalize why the Soviet government was paranoid. Well, to them, and with the limited information they had, that seemed like a very reasonable guess. And often it was sabotage. I mean, again, I said I don't think it was as relevant.
Well, it's not like Total level.
But there absolutely was intentional sabotage. Also, it's well documented.
Basically, never like assume nefarious intent. Rather, if you don't have direct evidence of it, right? And there's no direct evidence of this, and the reason they call it Holodomor, right, is because one, it sounds like Holocaust. Two, it means death through or like murder through hunger, right? Which is saying like we're actually being murdered by making them hungry, which just isn't true, right? So like there's all these different reasons, and yeah, like they were a backwards country at the time. It wasn't until the 50s that they're beginning to invent space travel, and even then, like the technological apparatus is very lopsided. There's still very rural areas, while the cities are, inventing space travel. So like, you just got to remember that things don't change overnight. They needed to actually build infrastructure that worked, and once they did, there were no more famines, right?
That's why when Noah says that the Holodomor didn't happen, he doesn't literally mean the famine didn't happen. He means that this narrative that's connected with the term Holodomor did not happen. That was not the mechanism by which the famine happened. There was no intent.
Yeah.
And as far as the numbers go, it's around 2.8 to 3.3 million people died. That's the most accurate number. It's not 8 or 10 million.
I also want to make it clear that this narrative was never believed in America back in the day when this was happening. The only media outlets actually, quote unquote, reporting on it was a known literal fascist, like Rudolf Hearst, I think his name was.
Hearst.
I know it's Hearst, but yeah. I think I'm iffy on Rudolph. The guy that the movie Rosebud or whatever was about, or Citizen Kane with Rosebud. That's about him. And I'm not saying he's a fascist, like, in the leftist way, he's mean or whatever. Like, he had Mussolini writing for his paper. Like he was a
I
fascist.
was just going to mention that. Like Mussolini was literally hired by him, by his paper.
And they paid him
Didn't
more than
Mussolini write for
people
multiple
made
social
it.
papers before he became a fascist?
What was that?
No,
GR?
no. During Mussolini was a dictator by this point. He was in power. This
Okay.
was in 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But so
because I remember.
he basically had this guy.
His salary for
his
Hearst was
Moscow
bigger than his
correspondent-
salary as the prime minister.
Hearst, yeah,
I don't know.
like Hearst paid him way more than his salary from Italy. But Hearst, his Moscow correspondent refused to write this story for him. He really, really wanted it written. So he gets this guy who goes by the alias Thomas Walker. And the pictures, if you like Google image search Holodomor, you'll literally get shown the Thomas Walker photos now. Turns out Thomas Walker was an alias this guy was using. It came out when he was in court for something different in the US. He was actually in court for breaking anti-slavery laws. He was transporting underage girls across state lines for the purposes of sex. So that's who this guy is. Just keep that in mind. He was taking old photos of the Volga famine and other random photos and then retouching them to look like bad but new photos, right? And passing those off as his experience in Soviet Russia with this terrible famine, and basically makes up like a bunch of nonsense. It came out in court that he was lying about all of it. He wasn't in the Soviet Union when he said he was, and he'd actually been kicked out and fired from multiple jobs for loafing. He ended up getting kicked out for trying to smuggle a czarist counter-revolutionary into a factory for sabotage. Like, just a really crappy guy. And this is where all of the quote-unquote evidence begins to come from. It only comes back in the 1980s in America when everybody had forgotten about it during the very end of the Cold War, when Reagan really, really needed some horrible things to say about the Soviet Union. So he had this one on lock. It was already in this mainstream media outlet and nobody remembered it. So people here, they didn't buy it until the 80s. And this is after Nazis in Ukraine had been propagating the narrative all along.
And the book source for what Noah is talking about is Fraud, Famine, Fascism by Total. And from Togger, you can read his article in the back paper. But not just Togger, you have also Davies and Wheatcroft. And, when we talk about the Holodomor as a genocide, I don't think, some people really have problems, obfuscate the academic debate, but more or less every academic agrees that it was not a genocide. There is some debate, obviously, about whether it was man-made or not, but the intent question is over. Even in liberal academia, it's not accepted that this was a genocide. Now, man-made means whether not just man-made in the sense of intent, in fact, not in that sense at all, but in the sense of whether human action or natural elements were more to blame. But yeah, honestly, no, GR, I hope you're satisfied if I may take.
We've been on this quite a while. Thanks for calling in. If you got anything else you want to debate over, by all means, try back next week. We got to keep moving, though. We have other calls to get to.
Yeah.
All right. Who do we have next, Sebastian?
Yep. Next up, we have Nyarla, who just wants to ask about whether or not anarcho-capitalism traces its roots to utopian socialism.
Cool.
Oh, wait. Nyarla actually dipped out of Discord.
Oh, what a jerk. That guy.
I don't know anything about that topic, so I'm good.
So it's actually Battle Cossack if he's here, and he wanted to talk about Cuba funding guerrilla groups in the 1960s and 70s in South America.
I know very little about that, unfortunately, but we'll see. What's up, Battle Cossack? Long time no talk, brother.
Yeah, sure. It's good to be back.
Great to have you.
Here.
So we
Yeah.
we got to be quick because we're already over time, but we wanted to make sure we got to everyone because Mac and I have a tendency to ramble when we get going on a topic like Holodomor. Like we went way over on our episode on that one too. So
Yeah, I
make sure.
did want to mention that. We already covered that whole argument.
Yeah, I want to make
Listeners.
sure we get people's questions. So what's up? You got a question about Cuba, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, and since we're on the topic of anti-communist meats, I wanted to clarify this sort of thing I had in my head around the time. During the 60s and 70s, various guerrilla groups emerged in several countries in the region, such as the Tupamaros in Uruguay, the MRE in Chile, and the ERP here in Argentina.
Yeah, the Nicaragua.
They say that these groups were at some point financed by Cuba and Nicaragua. I know that one of the members of the leftist Peronist guerrilla, Montoneros, studied and received military training in Nicaragua. That this is one of the main reasons, and this is one of the main reasons why Cuba and other countries and Nicaragua are on the list of state sponsors of terrorism, because they supposedly funded these groups. And I wanted to know at what extent the Cuban government had supposedly financed these groups, supposedly, and if they were involved in their creations, in their movement,
No, I don't know a lot about their actual like funding, sending money to people. I'm not sure how much concrete info there is that's just not classified and out there for the public about this. I will say, however, that Cuba was known for bringing people in and having Soviet military schools train them. Right, the school in Cuba during the 60s specifically was basically built by the Soviets. So it was all like sort of Soviet tactics and technology they were trained on. But that's the extent of my knowledge. Mac, do you know any more about this?
No.
Okay. So yeah, I'm sorry to disappoint you, Battle Cossack. You know who has studied Cuban history a lot more in depth than me is Eddie. So maybe send Eddie a message during one of his streams, and he'll be able to answer a little further for you, brother.
Yeah.
I may try. See, since I always send super chats, you know me. I ask Eddie. Thanks for the tip.
Our pleasure, brother. Have a great night. It's great to hear from you again, and make sure you call back again. I feel bad.
I had one last question though. Who made that cover of High Sheriff of Bale of Hazard? I tried to search up the artist, but it didn't come up. I wanted to know who made that awesome song, that cover.
That cover was done by I think Jesus Motorcycle made that one. So like that's kind of an original thing that I don't remember if it was AI or he knew someone who sang. I forget. But I'll ask him and I'll get the info for you. We've been asked that so many times, and I'm drawing a blank right now. But you're right, it's an awesome cover, and we will release that video on its own if you guys want. All right, Sebastian, who else we got?
Yep, the last call in the room is West Country Commie, and he just wanted to ask you about some stuff regarding gulags and debunking myths.
Gulags, excellent. What's up? One of my only two British friends.
Hello there, Noah. Hello, Matt. Good to be back on the show again.
Great to have you, brother. We got Mac from RTSG here too, so I'm going to let him field your question. Go ahead.
Well, just gulags in general, or do you want to say something concrete first?
Not really. I
could talk about the gulags, but
yeah, I mean, do that though, because the reason I'm asking this question though, because this weekend I've just heard a torrent of anti-communist BS about gulags, and I need some base knowledge back in my brain right now.
Yeah.
The best thing I know about it, I'll be quick, Max. Sorry.
Yeah.
The best thing I ever have is you know the gulags were happening during Jim Crow, right? So why are we acting like they're the evilest evil ever when Jim Crow was happening in America? But go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, no. To be honest, I haven't like researched gulags in a long time. That's one of those starting topics, almost.
Mhm.
Let's say there is that legendary or like cult text by Getty from 1993, which published realistic statistics about the gulags. You can just Google like Getty Gulag 1993, and basically, well, if you're coming from the perspective, depends on which layer you're arguing, right? Those statistics debunk the grand Gulag Archipelago argument and the Black Book of Communism argument, which claims that like tens of millions of people died in the gulags. That's obviously not true. The mortality rate in the gulags was not that high. It was like kind of semi-high in the early 30s, and then it increased drastically by during the war, which is kind of natural. And then after the war, the death rate in the Gulag was comparable to the prison death rate in the U.S. today, which is kind of crazy. It was really, really low. It was like a few percent or something like that. Now, obviously, the U.S. today, that's not exactly a gold standard or whatever. But when you're talking about the 1930s, or 1940s, I guess, in this case, and the technology they had and the state of the country, which was devastated after the war. Basically, the situation was not that terrible at all. And moreover, I guess when it comes to the political question is the gulags were more or less prisons. They had the same role. So 90, I don't know if it was 90, but the overwhelming majority of prisoners were just normal petty criminals / major criminals and similar. So the idea that it was a place reserved for political prisoners is dubious, just statistically. You have with gulags, I guess. I mean, gulags had actually some interesting. If gulags actually kind of, to me, they remind me of like the prisons in Sweden. Which are like these super modern, progressive prisons, because the prisons in Sweden are not. Yeah, they were not. So a prison in Sweden does not. It's not like a prison in the traditional sense, right? Like it's basically a cottage on some open field, and then you have some amenities around the place on this field. That's basically how the gulags were. And so there was no cells. It was basically kind of. I don't know if cottage is the right word, but
they were little towns, really, that the prisoners built, basically.
That's why they call them work colonies often, because, like, in effect, that's what kind of was happening. They also had some, like, when you talk about the law, the fact that you couldn't be in a gulag for over 10 years. And even that was for very, very severe crimes. Vast majority of people had 5 or less years in the gulags on good behavior. It was like a year or 2. And even during the gulags, they could go to their town for like 2 weeks. Or actually, I don't know if they could go to their town or if their family could visit them. But basically, they had mobility rights. What?
Good behavior got you weekend furloughs, and it would really just depend on how remote the town was, whether you could travel or people came to you.
Yeah.
I just want to list out just a couple quick facts about him too. I mean, at the time, prison labor was considered incredibly progressive, right? Because one, you were being taught a skill that you could use. You didn't have to resort to crime anymore because you were considered part of the proletariat, already, and you were being taught something that can bring you back into society afterwards. While you're in prison, you got paid the average salary for whatever job you're doing. In America, you're still paid pennies for what it basically amounts to slave labor. So really, the bad thing that they're talking about is having to do labor while you're in prison. And if you're okay with American prisons, then you should be okay with prison labor with an actual purpose. And they would do all kinds of stuff like have holiday celebrations, and they would, they were. It was not like the stories, but if your entire problem is prison labor just in general, right? Then you need to know that after Stalin's death, I think it was 57, 58, they got rid of prison labor in the Soviet Union when most of the industrialized world did, except for America. So like, it's just like taking every tiny little bad thing they can, exaggerating it, and then destroying all context and trying to paint it as this evil, sounding thing, and even using the word gulag, right? Gulag's actually Russian for like the sort of administration of the entire prison complex. But they say, in the gulag.
It's an acronym, basically.
Right. It's not like they just use that because it sounds scary.
I feel like gulags would have been, or would still be, much less taboo if they were not in Alaska. I think just kind of the concept of them. Now, the reason for this is basically exile in Alaska was a thing during Tsar, and there was
Siberia.
I'm saying Siberia.
They were not
Exile
sending them to the U.S.
No, not quite. That would be probably a worse punishment. But yeah, the exile in Siberia is kind of a historical thing that was happening in Russia for hundreds of years. And actually, back in the day, it was much more brutal because they would just kind of put them into the wilderness to die. But the point is that there was railways and other logistics which from the cities to Siberia. And the Soviet Union basically just repurposed this logistics from the cities to Siberia to create these work colonies. If the gulags were like near cities, for example, I think they would have been like, even in just like kind of perception, would have been much less taboo. I mean, that would kind of amount to like some sort of like a community service or community labor, however you call it, sentence, which is, kind of basically, I think that's probably a part of why it's the exile to Siberia. I was about to say Alaska again, but yeah, that kind of happened for logistical reasons, and obviously it was not the greatest for living conditions in some. But as far as I know, like that's from freezing, starvation, or anything similar to that, really, really low. The only time when that was an issue in the gulags was during World War II, but that's because the whole of industry was, on the ropes.
Yeah, and they were literally trying to move as much industry towards the center of the country as possible, as quickly as possible. Anyway, thank you so much, West Country Commie, for your call. We're going to take one more quick one before we end for the night. We're already over time, so who we got, Sebastian?
Yeah, we have Dale, who just wants to talk about current events for a second.
Sure.
And whether or not it'd be fair to argue about whether or not the current wave of deportations is seen primarily as intimidation or a means of consolidating political capital rather than actually trying to deport the most amount of people.
Sounds like a great question. What's up, Dale? How you doing, brother?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
Good. The floor is yours. Ask away.
From what I could see of a lot of Donald Trump's policies, especially in regards to how they're often put forward and how they're enacted, I would argue. I think it would be fair to argue that the recent crackdown on immigration that we're seeing could be viewed more through a lens of trying to intimidate people than necessarily deport people, especially since there's a lot of media coverage from both opposition sources and also the government itself.
I mean, in a way, you're not wrong. I think, though, that a lot of it is sort of false solutions to problems they cannot solve. right? So like,
Yeah.
we do have an immigration crisis in the country. We can't deny that. But we're not going to solve something that continues happening by deporting people, right? More people are just going to keep coming. Now, the thing with criminals and stuff like that, yes, there's traditional, sort of reactionary fear mongering, but it's not like, I don't know, it's not even as bad as the Muslim ban in his first term, right? But
Yeah.
what happens is it plays into the ongoing sort of R versus D side, which is, like Republicans are getting money to the conglomerates that are militarizing the border and all that kind of stuff. Democrats are being funded more by the giant financial institutions that are that own sort of the places that hire illegal work and drive wages down and all that other stuff. So they're constantly going back and forth between these two narratives. And if you notice over the decades, no problem gets solved because they don't address the actual cause of the problem. Why do people even flee their homes in the first place? Because their countries are being destroyed, right? So when you address that problem, then you can actually begin solving the immigration crisis, but they're incapable of addressing that problem because the entire system relies on destroying these other countries. What do you think, Matt?
Absolutely.
Me? Well, there's I feel like the European perspective on immigration is different, and even between the countries, it's very different here in Croatia than it is in Germany. Currently, immigrants are coming here with work visas, which usually expire in 6 to 12 months, and then they go back home. So it's not an immigrant crisis as such. There is not like a mass of immigrants that are going to stay in the country, but it's basically because of actually the demographic crisis that we have that I mentioned earlier in the stream. It's almost a necessity to import workers. Now, it's not, if we like took the free time pill and automated all the useless jobs, then probably there would be no that's actually probably the best solution to this problem. But that's not going to happen with these stupid status quo governments that we currently have. So in any case, even though in Croatia we don't have an actual immigrant crisis, you still have an insane level of fear mongering going on around that. And definitely we can see how immigrants are used to suppress worker rights and worker averages because the work visas are so easy to get and to issue, you as a bakery have zero interest in hiring a domestic worker for like 50% higher wage than someone from Nepal or Indonesia or whatever the hell, or India. So this importing of immigrants through these work visas lowers or at least slows down the entire average wage of the entire sector of workers and whatnot. So I don't think there is anything progressive or good about immigration. I mean, it's a problem, and it creates cultural divides and polarization and heightens racism, especially in these countries that are already racist. That's actually not really true. But the latter part.
When done en masse, it really can, especially with a bourgeois government. If instead you begin creating sort of bilateral agreements for people entering and leaving countries, and you make sure they make sense, right?
Yeah, a civilized, organized way. Like this is complete market anarchy that's happening.
Precisely, yes. And you're absolutely right. Look, I wish we had more time, Dale, because it's an interesting question. And I do like debunking this sort of myth that leftists are all about open borders and whatnot, right? But we're super over time. So thank you so much for your call, brother. If you have anything
You're
else for us, feel free to call next week. All right, everybody, that's going to wrap us up tonight. Thank you to all of our callers, and a very special thank you to Mac, as always, who is far smarter and more educated than I am, and our man Sebastian here, who's coming in to say bye at the end of the night. Everybody have a great week, and we will see you next Monday.
Stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Don't cling so hard to your possessions, for you have nothing if you have no right. Let racist ignorance be ended, for respect makes the empires fall. Freedom is merely privilege extended, unless enjoyed by one and all. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. Let no one build walls to divide us, walls of hatred nor walls of stone. Come greet the dawn and stand beside us. We'll live together or we'll die alone. In our world poisoned by exploitation, those who have taken, now they must give. And end the vanity of nations. We've but one earth on which to live. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in the song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The international ideal unites the human race. And so begins the final drama, in the streets and in the field. We stand unbowed before their armor, we defy their guns and shields. When we fight, provoked by their aggression, let us be inspired by life and love. For though they offer us concessions, change will not come from above. So come, brothers and sisters, for the struggle carries on. The International unites the world in a song. So comrades, come rally, for this is the time and place. The International ideal